The Krell warships appeared without warning at the edge of the solar system, like dark omens against the stars. 17 massive vessels hung in the void near Neptune, and their weapons were already charging. Admiral John Carter stood on the bridge of Earth Defense Station Sentinel and watched the holographic display with a sinking feeling in his gut. The aliens had finally come, and they were not here to talk. The message arrived 3 hours after the Krell fleet took position. It was simple and brutal in its clarity. Earth had 72 hours to surrender all weapons and technology and accept Krell rule. Refusal would result in the complete destruction of human civilization. John had read the intelligence reports, and he knew what happened to species that refused. The Krell had done this 14 times before, and only 2 races had chosen to fight. Both were now extinct. Lieutenant Kate Morrison worked frantically at her console, and her face was pale in the blue glow of the screens. She looked up at John with worry in her eyes. The Krell were establishing something called a quantum blockade around the entire solar system. Nothing could get in or out without their permission. Humanity was trapped like an animal in a cage. John walked to the communication station, and his boots echoed on the metal floor. He needed to contact Colorado Springs immediately. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain was a facility that housed humanity's last desperate hope. Project ZEUS had been built in secret over 3 years, and even John did not fully understand how it worked. The scientists called it a reality distortion weapon, but that explanation meant nothing to him. All he knew was that ZEUS was designed to fight enemies that conventional weapons could not touch. The secure line connected, and John entered his authorization codes. The screen flickered and then showed the face of Dr. Lisa Hayes. She was younger than John had expected, with tired eyes that suggested too many sleepless nights. Lisa already knew why he was calling. The sensor networks had detected the Krell fleet the moment it arrived. John gave the order that he had hoped never to give. "Wake up, ZEUS." Lisa nodded slowly, and her fingers moved across her console. Around her in the mountain facility, massive systems began powering up for the first time in months. The weapon that could save humanity or destroy it was coming online. Colonel Paul Bennett stood beside Lisa in the control room and watched the startup sequences with growing tension. He was military liaison to Project ZEUS, and he had read every report about what this weapon could do. The science terrified him, but the alternative was worse. Without ZEUS, the human race had perhaps 4 days left to exist. Paul asked the question that was eating at him. How long until they could fire? Lisa checked her displays and did some quick calculations in her head. 48 hours for full power, but they could manage a shot at 60% capacity in 36 hours. That left them with a buffer of exactly 36 hours before the Krell deadline expired. The holographic display in the center of the room showed what Project ZEUS actually was. It did not look impressive at first glance. 47 satellites positioned throughout the solar system and connected by quantum entanglement networks. Each satellite was no larger than a school bus, and they had been deployed quietly over the past 2 years. The Krell had no idea they existed. Paul studied the schematic and tried to understand what he was looking at. The satellites did not contain missiles or energy weapons. Instead, they housed quantum field generators that could do something unprecedented. Lisa had tried to explain it to him once using words like space-time manipulation and causality disruption. Paul was a soldier, not a physicist, so he had asked her to simplify it. Lisa had thought for a moment and then said that ZEUS punched holes in reality itself. Normal weapons attacked matter and energy, but ZEUS attacked the mathematical framework that made matter and energy possible. Anything caught in a ZEUS field would not be destroyed in the traditional sense. It would be erased from existence as if it had never been there at all. Paul had asked if that was even possible, and Lisa had smiled grimly. The math said yes, but they had never tested it at full scale. There was no way to know for certain until they fired the weapon for real. The simulations looked good, but simulations were not reality, or in this case, simulations were not the absence of reality, which was what ZEUS created. Back on the Sentinel, John coordinated with military leaders across Earth and Mars. Every ship and every weapon system was being brought online. The defense platforms around Earth hummed with power, and the fleet moved into protective formations. Everyone knew it would not be enough. The Krell were centuries ahead of humanity in technology. Earth's weapons would barely scratch their shields. Kate Morrison looked up from her console with new information. They were receiving a transmission from Cheyenne Mountain. Dr. Hayes reported that ZEUS would be ready to fire in 32 hours. John acknowledged the message and then opened a fleet-wide channel. All commanders were ordered to prepare evacuation protocols. Once ZEUS fired, anyone too close to a Krell ship would die. Kate worked quietly for a few minutes and then asked the question that had been bothering her. What exactly did ZEUS do? John hesitated because the answer was classified, but she deserved to know. They were all about to bet humanity's survival on this weapon. John explained it as simply as he could. ZEUS did not destroy enemy ships. It destroyed the space that the ships occupied. The Krell had shields that could stop any known weapon, but shields only protected against attacks in normal space-time. ZEUS removed the normal part of that equation. Inside a ZEUS field, the laws of physics became optional, and matter could not maintain coherent existence. Ships caught in the field would simply cease to be. Kate's face went white as she processed that information. It sounded like something from a nightmare. John agreed with her unspoken thought. Yes, it was terrifying, and yes, it was the only chance Earth had. The Krell thought they were invincible, and perhaps against conventional weapons they were. But ZEUS was not a conventional weapon. It was something the galaxy had never seen before. On the Krell flagship, Commander Vexthor reviewed the tactical situation with satisfaction. The humans were moving their forces around, but it was clearly defensive positioning. They showed no signs of preparing an attack. Their communications traffic suggested panic and confusion. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected. In 72 hours, Earth would surrender, and the Krell Dominion would gain another conquered species. Vexthor's tactical officer reported unusual energy readings from several points in the human solar system. Minor fluctuations in the quantum field that suggested some kind of networked array. Vexthor dismissed it as irrelevant. Humans did not have the technology to threaten Krell warships. Whatever they were building was almost certainly a desperate bluff. The countdown had begun, and neither side fully understood what was about to happen. Commander Vexthor stood in the observation deck of his flagship and looked down at the blue and green planet that the humans called home. He had conducted 17 blockades during his military career, and they all followed the same predictable pattern. First, the prey species would show defiance and make brave speeches about freedom. Then reality would set in as they realized resistance was impossible. Finally, they would surrender and accept their new place in the Krell Dominion. The tactical officer approached with a status update. The quantum barrier was fully operational and functioning perfectly. No ship could enter or leave the human solar system without passing through Krell checkpoints. All human communications beyond their star system had been severed. They were completely isolated from any potential allies. Vexthor asked if the humans had attempted any aggressive actions. The tactical officer shook his head and reported that human forces remained in defensive positions around their homeworld and Mars colony. There were increased power signatures from several ground installations, but nothing that registered as a threat. The humans were behaving exactly as expected for a species facing overwhelming force. Vexthor clicked his mandibles in satisfaction, but then issued a word of caution. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for their unpredictability, and that was what made them potentially dangerous. Maintain close surveillance on all human activities, no matter how insignificant they appeared. On Earth, Admiral John Carter worked around the clock coordinating with military leaders from every nation. The combined defense forces of humanity were ready to fight, but everyone knew the truth. They might delay the Krell by hours or perhaps a full day, but without ZEUS, defeat was mathematically certain. The aliens possessed weapons and defenses that Earth could not match. Kate Morrison's console beeped with an incoming transmission from Cheyenne Mountain. Dr. Hayes sent word that ZEUS would be ready to fire in 32 hours. That gave them 8 hours of buffer time before the Krell deadline expired. John immediately transmitted orders to all fleet commanders: prepare evacuation protocols and begin moving ships away from the Krell positions. Once ZEUS fired, anyone within 10,000 kilometers of an alien vessel was going to experience something very unpleasant. Kate looked at John with curiosity in her eyes. She knew ZEUS was classified, but if they were about to use it, she felt she deserved to know what it actually did. John considered the question and then decided she was right. His security clearance allowed him to brief senior officers, and Kate qualified. John explained that ZEUS did not destroy ships in any traditional sense. It destroyed space itself. The Krell believed they were untouchable, because their shield technology could deflect any known weapon. Energy beams bounced off harmlessly. Kinetic projectiles were vaporized before impact. Nuclear warheads were absorbed and dispersed. The Krell defensive systems could handle everything in humanity's arsenal. But ZEUS did not attack the ships. It attacked the mathematical framework of reality in a localized area. Kate frowned in confusion and asked what that meant. John admitted he did not fully understand the physics either, but Dr. Hayes had given him an analogy. Imagine space-time as a piece of fabric stretched tight. ZEUS punched holes in that fabric. Anything caught in those holes simply ceased to exist in a meaningful way. The ships would not explode or burn or break apart. They would be erased, removed from the causal structure of the universe as if they had never been there. Kate's expression shifted from confusion to horror. That was terrifying on a level she had never imagined. John agreed quietly. Yes, it was absolutely terrifying, and it was also humanity's only chance of survival. Deep in Cheyenne Mountain, Lisa Hayes monitored the ZEUS activation sequence with intense focus. Every satellite in the array needed to synchronize perfectly, or the weapon would fail. Worse than fail, actually. If the quantum entanglement network collapsed during firing, the resulting cascade could create a reality anomaly that would spread throughout the solar system. The 3% chance of catastrophic failure that she had mentioned to Colonel Bennett was not a joke. Paul Bennett stood beside her and watched the main display. Power levels were climbing steadily as the massive reactors fed energy into the satellite network. He asked how confident she was that ZEUS would work as designed. Lisa did not look away from her screens, but her answer was measured and honest. The mathematics were sound, and the simulations had been successful, but this would be the first full-scale test. Theory and reality did not always align perfectly. Paul understood what she was not saying. They were gambling with the survival of humanity based on equations and computer models. If ZEUS failed, or worse, if it created an uncontrolled reality distortion, then the Krell would not need to destroy Earth. The planet would destroy itself. Lisa seemed to read his thoughts and added one more detail. If ZEUS worked as designed, the weapon would rewrite the rules of warfare for every species in the galaxy. No shield technology could protect against an attack that erased the space you were occupying. The Krell would learn that superior technology meant nothing when your enemy could delete you from existence. In orbit around Earth, the defense fleet continued its preparations. Ship captains briefed their crews on the evacuation procedures and made sure everyone understood the stakes. Once ZEUS fired, there would be no second chances. Either the weapon would work, and the Krell would be destroyed, or it would fail and humanity would face annihilation. On the Krell flagship, sensors detected the power buildup from the human satellite network. The readings were unusual and did not match any weapon system in the Krell database. Vexthor was informed of the anomaly, and he reviewed the data personally. The energy output was significant, but it was not being directed toward the Krell fleet. The power was building but not being released. The tactical officer suggested they investigate further, but Vexthor dismissed the concern. It was clearly a bluff. The humans were trying to intimidate the Krell with a show of force that meant nothing, maintain current positions and ignore the display. When the deadline arrived and nothing happened, the humans would realize their bluff had failed, but some part of Vexthor felt uncertain. Humans had a reputation for pulling unexpected tricks when cornered. The intelligence report said they were creative and adaptable in ways that made them dangerous despite their primitive technology. Was it possible they had developed something that Krell science could not recognize? He pushed the doubt aside. Impossible. The Krell Dominion had studied hundreds of species over thousands of years. No race at humanity's level of development could create a weapon that threatened Krell warships. The sensors must be misreading the energy signatures. The hours ticked down slowly. On Earth, billions of people watched the sky and prayed. In space, the Krell fleet maintained its blockade with casual confidence. And deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, the ZEUS weapon system charged toward firing capacity. Lisa Hayes watched the power level indicator climb past 90%. 95%. 98%. Colonel Bennett stood ready at her shoulder. The authorization codes had been entered and verified. All safety protocols had been reviewed and acknowledged. ZEUS was ready, 100%. Lisa turned to Paul and spoke the words that would change everything. ZEUS was fully charged and ready to fire on his command. Paul took a deep breath and felt the weight of what he was about to do. With one word, he would unleash a weapon that could save humanity or doom it. He gave the order. Fire ZEUS. Lisa's finger came down on the activation control, and across the solar system, 47 satellites began generating fields where reality itself would cease to function. The countdown to chaos had ended. Now came the chaos itself. The effect happened instantly, and it was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. At 47 points around the Krell blockade, space-time simply stopped working the way it was supposed to. The ZEUS satellites did not fire beams of energy or launch missiles. Instead, they created localized areas where the fundamental laws of physics became suggestions rather than rules. On the Krell flagship, every alarm system activated at once. The bridge filled with warning sounds and flashing lights. Commander Vexthor spun toward his tactical officer and demanded a report. The officer's voice was shaking as he tried to explain what the sensors were detecting. Reality distortion fields were forming around multiple points in the system. The fabric of spacetime itself was breaking down. Before Vexthor could respond, the first Krell destroyer near Europa encountered a ZEUS field. The ship did not explode or catch fire or break apart. It did something much worse. The destroyer's hull began existing in multiple states at the same time. Parts of the ship were solid and void simultaneously. The crew experienced every possible outcome of their existence in a single frozen instant. The destroyer tried to exist and not exist at the same moment. Its atoms were there and somewhere else and nowhere at all. The ship's matter did not disperse into space. It contradicted itself. Within 3 seconds, the destroyer had become a quantum impossibility that the universe itself could not accept. Reality rejected the paradox and simply edited the ship out of existence. Where a warship had been floating, there was now only empty space. Vexthor stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The destroyer was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. The sensors insisted something should be there, but proved nothing was. There was no debris field or energy signature or any evidence the ship had ever existed. He shouted orders to his fleet. All ships execute evasive maneuvers immediately. Break blockade formation and retreat to safe distance. But even as he gave the commands, Vexthor realized they might already be too late. The ZEUS fields were not static. They were expanding and growing larger as they consumed more of spacetime around them. A Krell battlecruiser attempted to engage its faster-than-light drive to escape the expanding field. The moment the ship tried to enter hyperspace, it crossed into a ZEUS distortion. The interaction between the battlecruiser's exotic drive system and the reality-breaking field was catastrophic. The ship did not just cease to exist. It created a cascading failure in spacetime that rippled outward for thousands of kilometers. 2 more Krell vessels were caught in the wake of the cascade. They vanished without even the brief moment of contradiction that the first destroyer had experienced. The universe deleted them cleanly and efficiently. On the Sentinel station, John Carter watched the tactical display with a mixture of awe and deep unease. The ZEUS weapon was working exactly as advertised, but seeing it in action was disturbing on a fundamental level. Ships were not being destroyed. They were being removed from reality itself. Kate Morrison's hands trembled slightly as she monitored the sensor readings. 5 Krell ships were gone, then 6, then 7. The ZEUS fields continued expanding at a steady rate, and the alien fleet was scattering in panic. She looked at John and spoke in a whisper. It was actually working. ZEUS was actually working. John nodded slowly, but he felt no triumph. They had just unleashed something that should never have existed. A weapon that did not kill so much as erase. Future historians would debate whether humanity had saved itself or crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But those were problems for later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was survival. In Cheyenne Mountain, Lisa Hayes monitored every aspect of ZEUS's performance. The weapon was operating within all expected parameters. The reality distortion fields were stable and expanding at the projected rates. The quantum entanglement network connecting all 47 satellites was holding strong with no signs of collapse. Most importantly, the 3% chance of catastrophic failure had not occurred. Colonel Paul Bennett stood beside her and asked the question that was weighing on everyone's mind. How long until the fields dissipated? Lisa checked her calculations and gave him the timeline. 12 hours at current expansion rates. After that, space-time would gradually heal itself and restore normal physics to the affected areas. Once the fields collapsed, the space would be perfectly safe for navigation again. Paul asked what would happen to anything caught in those fields. Lisa's answer was simple and final. Gone. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, but literally erased from the causal structure of the universe. The ships would not leave behind wreckage or radiation or any trace that they had existed. It would be as if they had never been there at all. On the Krell flagship, Vexthor faced a reality he had never imagined possible. His fleet was being annihilated by a weapon he did not understand and could not fight. The tactical officer reported 9 confirmed losses, with 4 more ships dangerously close to the expanding fields. Only 4 vessels, including the flagship, were currently outside the immediate danger zone. Vexthor demanded options. Could they destroy the human satellites that were generating these reality distortions? The tactical officer frantically checked his instruments and delivered crushing news. The satellites were positioned at the exact center of each distortion field. To attack them, the Krell ships would have to pass through the same anomaly that had erased their companions. What about bombardment from maximum range? The tactical officer admitted he had no idea if it would work. They did not know if conventional weapons could even interact normally with space inside those fields. Their attacks might pass through harmlessly, or they might trigger an even worse cascade effect. Vexthor ground his mandibles together in rage and fear. Order all remaining ships to retreat to the edge of the solar system at maximum speed. They had to escape before the fields expanded to overtake them, but as the Krell fleet turned to flee, they discovered another horrible truth about ZEUS. The reality distortion fields were expanding faster than the Krell ships could travel at sublight speed. Engaging faster than light drives while still inside the solar system was suicide, as 3 ships had already proven. They were trapped between slow death and instant annihilation. The tactical officer reported the mathematics in a breaking voice. At current rates, the expanding fields would overtake the remaining ships in 40 minutes. There was no escape. The Krell were going to die in a universe that no longer recognized their right to exist. Vexthor stared at the tactical display and felt true fear for the first time in his military career. The Krell Dominion had conquered 14 species. They had destroyed 2 more who dared to resist. They were the masters of this region of space. But the humans had created something that rendered all of that meaningless, a weapon the Krell had no defense against, a weapon that did not just kill but unmade. He turned to his communications officer and gave an order he had never imagined speaking. Transmit a message to Earth: unconditional surrender. Immediate cessation of all hostilities. Request permission to retreat safely. Request mercy from the humans. The message went out, and Vexthor waited for a response that would decide whether his species would learn from this defeat or simply cease to exist. Around his flagship, the ZEUS fields continued their inexorable expansion, and reality itself screamed in protest at what humanity had done. The surrender message from Commander Vexthor reached Earth 12 minutes after it was transmitted. Admiral John Carter listened to the alien commander's words with a carefully neutral expression, but inside he felt a complex swirl of emotions. Relief that humanity would survive, unease at what they had unleashed, and a deep uncertainty about what came next. John opened a secure channel to Cheyenne Mountain and asked Dr. Hayes the critical question. Could they stop ZEUS now that the Krell were surrendering? Lisa's response was not what he wanted to hear. The reality distortion fields would continue expanding for another 8 hours before they reached maximum size and began dissipating naturally. There was no emergency shutdown. The quantum entanglement network had to burn through its entire energy reserve before it would power down. John felt his stomach tighten. Could the remaining Krell ships survive that long? Lisa ran quick calculations and came back with cautiously optimistic news. If the Krell maintained their current retreat vector and absolutely did not attempt any faster than light jumps, then yes, they would reach safe distance. The margin was thin, though. They would clear the danger zone with approximately 40 minutes to spare. John opened a channel to the Krell flagship and introduced himself. Commander Vexthor's surrender was accepted. The Krell were ordered to proceed on their current retreat course at maximum sublight speed. Under no circumstances were they to engage faster than light drives until they had completely cleared the outer solar system. Did the commander understand? There was a pause before Vexthor's translated voice responded. Yes, he understood. The Krell would comply with all directives. Then the alien commander said something that revealed how deeply humanity had shocked him. He had not known humans possessed such weapons. Krell intelligence had been catastrophically inadequate. John allowed himself a grim smile. The intelligence was fine. Humanity had only finished building ZEUS 3 months ago. Even the humans were not certain it would work until 10 minutes ago when they activated it for the first time. The pause that followed was longer this time. Vexthor's voice carried a note of disbelief mixed with horror. The humans had deployed an untested superweapon, one that could have destroyed their entire solar system. They had gambled everything on a theory that might have failed catastrophically. John responded with simple honesty. Humanity did not have much choice. The alternative was certain extinction. When faced with guaranteed death or possible death, humans would always choose possible death. It was part of what made them human. Vexthor seemed to absorb that and then ask the question that mattered most to him. What were the terms for Krell survival? What would the humans demand in exchange for allowing the 4 remaining ships to leave? John looked at Kate Morrison, who was monitoring the ZEUS expansion fields on her console. She gave him a thumbs-up signal. If the Krell maintained their current course, they would make it clear before the fields reached them. John made his decision about what kind of message to send to the galaxy. The 4 Krell ships would be allowed to leave the solar system completely unharmed. No reparations would be demanded. No hostages taken. The Krell were free to go home, but they would carry a message back to their dominion. Earth was no longer available for conquest. Any future attempt to blockade or threaten humanity would be met with immediate ZEUS deployment. John continued in a harder voice. The humans had positioned ZEUS satellites throughout their system, and they could build more. Many more. The technology was proven and the manufacturing process was established. If the Krell ever came back, they would face not 47 satellites but hundreds. Thousands if necessary. Did Commander Vexthor understand? The alien's response came quickly. Perfectly understood. The Dominion would be informed that Earth was unsuitable for incorporation. Then after a brief hesitation, Vexthor added something else. A warning perhaps, or advice. The galaxy would learn what humanity had done here. Other species would hear about ZEUS. Some would be deterred, but others might see humans as too dangerous to allow to exist. John acknowledged the warning. Humanity would deal with that problem when it arrived. For now, the Krell needed to focus on getting their people out of the solar system safely. The conversation ended and John closed the channel. Kate looked at him with concern. What if the Krell commander was right? What if other species decided humanity was too dangerous? John shrugged slowly. Then humans would build more ZEUS arrays and defend themselves. They had crossed the line now. There was no going back to being prey. Over the next 8 hours, humanity watched as the ZEUS fields reached their maximum expansion and then slowly began to collapse. It was a strange process. The areas where reality had broken down gradually healed themselves as normal physics reasserted control. When the distortion finally cleared completely, there was no sign that 13 Krell warships had ever existed. The space they had occupied was pristine. No debris fields or radiation signatures or sensor ghosts. Just empty void as clean and clear as it had been before the Krell arrived. It was as if the ships had been edited out of history itself. In a sense, that was exactly what had happened. The 4 surviving Krell vessels reached safe distance with 37 minutes to spare. As soon as they cleared the outer solar system, they engaged their faster-than-light drives and disappeared. They were heading home carrying news that would change everything the Krell thought they knew about humanity. 3 days after the battle, Dr. Lisa Hayes stood in her laboratory reviewing the mountains of data that ZEUS had generated during its first combat deployment. Colonel Paul Bennett found her there surrounded by screens filled with quantum field equations and space-time analysis charts. Paul told her what she already knew. She had done it. She had saved the human race from extinction. Lisa did not look away from her screens, and her response surprised him. Had she saved humanity or just painted a bigger target on their collective back? What did she mean by that? Lisa finally turned to face him. ZEUS worked perfectly, better than the simulations had predicted, and now the entire galaxy knew that humans possessed weapons capable of unmaking reality itself. Did Paul know what happened to species that developed such weapons? Did they become too dangerous to attack or too dangerous to be allowed to exist? Paul considered the question carefully. Then they would build more ZEUS arrays. They would defend Earth and the colonies. What other option was there? Lisa shook her head. The problem was not whether they could defend themselves. The problem was that weapons like ZEUS were fundamentally apocalyptic. No other species had developed this technology. And it was not because they lacked the knowledge. The physics behind ZEUS were actually fairly straightforward once you made certain conceptual leaps. Other advanced species could have built reality distortion weapons if they wanted to, but they chose not to. Because weapons that tear holes in space-time were too dangerous. They threatened not just ships or planets, but the fundamental structure of the universe itself. Paul asked the obvious question. Then why did Lisa build ZEUS? She looked at him with tired eyes. Because the Krell were going to destroy humanity anyway. Earth did not have a choice. She was not saying they should not have built it. She was saying there would be consequences they could not predict. Consequences that might be worse than the original threat. Paul was quiet for a long moment. So what did they do now? Lisa smiled grimly and gave him the answer that defined humanity. Now they prepared. They built more ZEUS arrays and deployed them around the colonies. They expanded their defensive network and made it clear that attacking humans meant accepting unacceptable losses, and they hoped that would be enough. What if it was not enough? Lisa's smile widened slightly. Then they would cross that bridge when they came to it. Just like humans always had, with courage and creativity and absolute refusal to accept the impossible. 6 months after the Krell blockade, Admiral John Carter stood on the observation deck of humanity's newest deep space exploration vessel. The ship was named Magellan, and it represented humanity's determination to reach beyond their solar system. The vessel carried diplomats and scientists who would make first contact with species that had not tried to conquer Earth. Commander Kate Morrison stood beside John and watched the stars stream past as the Magellan traveled at faster than light speed. She had been promoted after the battle, and now served as the ship's executive officer. Kate asked the question that had been bothering her for months. Would other species ever forgive humanity for creating ZEUS? John considered his answer carefully. Some species would forgive them and understand that ZEUS was built out of desperate necessity. Others would never forgive or forget that humans had created a weapon that could erase matter from existence. But forgiveness was not really the point anymore. Humanity had proven they would not go quietly into extinction. They would fight with everything they had, even if it meant breaking the universe. Kate laughed quietly at that description. It sounded either very brave or completely insane. John smiled and agreed it was probably both. That was what made humans unique in the galaxy. They did not accept impossible odds. They did not surrender to overwhelming force. When someone tried to destroy them, humans responded by building weapons that could destroy reality itself. The Magellan continued on its journey, carrying humanity's new message to the stars. We are here. We are strong. We will not be threatened or cowed. And we have the means to defend ourselves against any aggressor, no matter how powerful they believe themselves to be. Back on Earth, the ZEUS satellite network remained active and vigilant. Additional arrays were under construction around Mars and the newer colonies. Humanity was expanding its defensive perimeter and making certain that no species would ever be able to blockade them again. The satellites hung silent in space like sleeping guardians ready to wake if danger threatened. In the Krell Dominion, the 4 surviving ships had delivered their report to the High Command. The news had sent shockwaves through Krell society. Humans possessed weapons that Krell science could barely comprehend, weapons that did not destroy through force but through erasure. The Dominion strategists ran countless simulations and reached the same conclusion every time. There was no defense against ZEUS. The Krell High Command issued new standing orders regarding Earth. The human solar system was to be avoided completely. No Krell ships would approach within 10 light years of human space. Any contact with humans would be diplomatic and peaceful. The species that the Krell had planned to conquer had instead become too dangerous to touch. Other species heard the story through the vast network of interstellar communication. The tales spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Humans had destroyed 13 Krell warships without firing a single conventional weapon. They had created distortion fields that erased matter from existence. Some species reacted with fear and began plotting ways to eliminate the human threat. Others reacted with respect and curiosity about potential alliance. The Verox Collective was among those who chose diplomacy over confrontation. They sent an ambassador to meet with the Magellan 6 weeks into its mission. Ambassador Krellick was an insectoid being who spoke through a translation device. He congratulated humanity on their victory and expressed his government's interest in establishing trade relations. John met with the ambassador in the Magellan's conference room. Krellick was direct and honest about his reasons for seeking alliance. The Verox had been subjects of the Krell Dominion for 40 years. They had watched as the blockade of Earth ended in disaster for the Krell. Now they wanted to discuss mutual defense agreements with the species that had defeated their oppressors. John listened carefully and then asked the obvious question. What did the Verox want from humanity? Krellick's answer was simple. Protection. The Verox were preparing to declare independence from Krell rule. When they did, the Dominion would send warships to crush the rebellion, but if humanity made it known that they would defend Verox independence, then the Krell would think twice before attacking. Kate Morrison, who sat in on the meeting, asked whether the Verox expected humans to fight their wars for them. Krellick clicked his mandibles in what the translator identified as laughter. No, the Verox would do their own fighting. They simply needed the threat of ZEUS to keep the Krell from overwhelming them with superior numbers. The presence of human observers and perhaps a few ZEUS satellites would be enough. John said he would transmit the proposal to Earth for consideration. It was not his decision to make. But personally, he saw the logic in the Verox proposal. Humanity could not afford to stand alone in the galaxy. They needed allies, and the Verox were offering friendship. The meeting ended cordially, and John sent an encrypted report back to Earth. Within a week, he received authorization to negotiate a mutual defense treaty. Humanity would place 3 ZEUS satellites in Verox space and station a small fleet there. In exchange, the Verox would provide intelligence about Krell movements and access to their advanced manufacturing technology. It was the beginning of what would become the Terran Alliance. Over the next 2 years, 7 more species joined. Most were former subjects of aggressive empires who saw humanity as protectors. A few were independent species who recognized that alliance with humans offered security that isolation did not. On Earth, Dr. Lisa Hayes continued her work on Project ZEUS. The weapon had proven itself in combat, but she was not satisfied. The current system required careful positioning of satellites and had limited range. Lisa began developing second-generation ZEUS technology that could be deployed rapidly and operated from greater distances. Colonel Paul Bennett reviewed her proposals with a mixture of admiration and concern. Lisa was making ZEUS more powerful and more flexible. That was good for defense, but also raised troubling questions. How powerful was too powerful? At what point did weapons designed for protection become tools of aggression? Lisa understood his concerns, but she had a different perspective. ZEUS existed now, and that could not be changed. Other species would eventually develop similar weapons. The galaxy had entered a new age of warfare, whether anyone liked it or not. The question was not whether reality-distorting weapons should exist. The question was whether humans would stay ahead of potential enemies. Paul accepted her logic, even though it disturbed him. He approved the second-generation ZEUS project and increased funding for research. Humanity had won one battle, but the long war for survival had just begun. 5 years after the Krell blockade, Earth celebrated its admission to the Galactic Council. It was a prestigious body that included the most advanced and influential species. Humanity's admission was controversial. Many council members feared what humans might do with their power, but others argued that humans had shown restraint after their victory. They had not used ZEUS to conquer others. They had used it only for defense. John Carter, who was now an admiral of the fleet, attended the ceremony on the Council's homeworld. He gave a speech that was broadcast across thousands of planets. Humanity came to the stars in peace, but we will defend ourselves if threatened. We offer friendship to all species and enmity to none. But let it be known that Earth and her allies are protected by weapons that cannot be overcome by force. The speech was met with mixed reactions. Some delegates applauded while others sat in silence, but no one challenged the message. Humanity had proven they meant what they said. ZEUS was real and it worked. Kate Morrison stood beside John after the speech. She asked if he thought they had finally achieved security. John looked out at the alien city beyond the windows and considered his answer. Security was never permanent. There would always be new threats and new challenges. But humanity had bought themselves time and respect. That was more than they had 6 years ago when the Krell arrived. The Magellan returned to Earth orbit a year later. Its mission had been a success. Treaties signed. Alliances formed. The groundwork laid for humanity's place among the stars. John retired from active duty and became an advisor to the Terran Alliance command structure. Kate took command of her own ship and continued exploring the Galaxy Dr. Lisa Hayes never stopped working on ZEUS. She refined the technology and developed countermeasures against potential similar weapons. Some called her obsessed, but she saw it as necessary. Humanity's survival depended on staying ahead of any potential enemies. 20 years after the blockade, a new generation had grown up knowing that Earth was protected by weapons that could break reality. They took it for granted that humanity was a major power in the galaxy. They did not remember the fear that had gripped the world when the Krell arrived, but John Carter remembered. He was old now and his body was failing, but his mind remained sharp. He spent his days writing a history of the ZEUS project for future generations. He wanted them to understand the choice that had been made, the terrible weapon that had been built out of desperate necessity, the line that had been crossed. The final words of his history were simple. We did what we had to do to survive. We built ZEUS and we used it. The galaxy will never forget, and neither should we. These weapons exist now and they cannot be unmade. Our responsibility is to ensure they are